Are you thinking of getting a pilot's license, or maybe you're on your way and you feel like it's taken a bit longer than you thought it would, or costing more than you'd expect? Well, this video might help. When I started out, I found it really difficult to find real life information about the whole PPL experience, particularly in the UK. So when I started my PPL journey, I said to myself that I'd log every detail so that I can make a video to share it with others like me. So here it is. Now, I'm going to get straight to the point first. For those just thinking about getting a pilot's license, you might have read that in the UK it takes 45 hours and around £9,000 to complete. Well, spoiler alert, you'd be lucky if it did. I really did go into thinking that I could do it in that time. Well, actually, I don't know anyone at all that's achieved it in that time or budget. So if you are watching this and thinking, I did, comment below, leave some tips on how you achieved it. But for now, I'm going to take you into my analysis of my PPL journey, give you my facts, my opinions, where I could have finished sooner, where I could have finished with more change in my pocket. And I've also highlighted 7 tips that I really do recommend you take on board. So here we go, let's go. So what does it take to gain your private pilot's license in the UK? Well, you're going to need 45 hours of flying time, of which 25 hours is going to be dual flying with an instructor and 10 hours supervised solo. Some of that's going to be cross-country, some of it's going to be circuits around your aerodrome. You also need to complete your qualifying cross-country flight, which is going to be a minimum of 150 nautical miles solo flight that's going to stop at 2 additional aerodromes. You also have to complete 9 theoretical exams and pass a Class 2 medical. And finally, you're going to need to pass a skills test in the plane, as well as a practical radio communications test. It sounds a lot when you say it out loud, but from when you start, you've got plenty of time to do it in. So that's the criteria. What's it going to cost? Well, you're going to be paying for the aircraft hire, the instructor time, the theory exams, the skills tests, the practical radio exam, equipment like maps and the theory subject books. On top of that, there's also the cost you might not be expecting, all of which I'm going to go into detail. So let's start by breaking these down. The average flight time, including plane hire and instructor time, is around £180 to £200. Multiply that by the 45 hours, that's going to cost you £8,100 minimum. The reality is that on average, people in the UK take about 55 to 60 hours to complete. So it's going to be more somewhere in between sort of £9,500 to £10,500. But we'll highball it. So let's just go with 11 grand for now. Some schools you're going to need to pay landing fees and touch and go fees, which is where the plane touches land, touches runway and takes off again. Each lesson will need a landing. The average landing fee is £15, which equates to £675. And you'll be doing at least 3 or 4 touch and goes and at least, 30 of your lesson hours. So if your average touch and goes £8, that's going to equate to 960. So that's 1,635 right there. Now, not all schools charge this. It does depend on the relationship the school has with the aerodrome club. And on the aerodrome, you'll probably need to join an aero club. That'll be anything from £100 to £300 a year. If it takes you more than a year to do your training, then you'll need to pay twice, for each year. So let's just call it £600 in club fees. So now we're over £13,000. What else is there? You'll most likely want your own headset. This can be a few hundred to £1,000, plus the theory books to help get you through your exams. That's going to be £160 or thereabouts, and the exams themselves, they're £35 an exam, so that's £315. The final skills test, I'm not sure what that is off the top of my head, but we'll cover that later on in the video. So that's going to cost you. And then there's the flight bag and stuff in there, like the flight computer, the map, which you'll probably be updating in your training period, no doubt. And then there's the medical too. So all in, based on averages across the UK, you'll need to budget around £15,000. So what did I pay? Well, all in all, I paid a little shy of £18,000 in total. Yeah. And to think I went into it thinking I could do it within 9,000. But, let's double click on this a little. Where did that money go and what could I have done a bit differently? As I said, I kept a log of what I spent money on, and if you skipped the introduction of the video, you can access all of that data by clicking in the link below in the description. So let's get into it. The aero club I was learning with started me out with a pack that included the Pauli's theoretical knowledge books, covering all the subjects I needed to learn, the CRP1 computer used for well, calculating all sorts of important stuff, a protractor, a chart scale ruler and a map, a kneeboard for making writing easier when I'm actually flying, a VFR flight log pad and pilot logbook to track all of my flights. So everything that's listed as materials in my analysis, all in all, totaled £300. After a few lessons with the school headset, I decided I needed my own. So I went full out and got one of the best headsets at the time, the Bose A20s. I got them secondhand for £700, so I saved myself about 300 quid there. No regrets. In fact, I'd just say do it if you can afford it. Don't mess about. Go on, get yourself a decent headset because you're going to anyway. So that brought me up to £1,000. I spent another £180 in the second month on the equipment, but for some reason I didn't log what that equipment was, and so for the life of me I can't remember. Anyway, a year and a half later I needed to update my map. So these get updated most years, so if you don't get it done in the first year, you'll also need to be paying for that. So my total equipment cost was £1,195.99. So here's my first top tip. If you want to save money, buy second-hand kit and use the school headsets. I would have saved about £1,000 if I'd have done that. Most pilots that finish their PPL, they don't need the kit that they bought there. So go onto Facebook groups and just ask. You'll grab yourself a bargain, I guarantee it. Now, one of the first big milestones in your journey is going to be your first solo flight. And to do this, you're going to need to do two things. First is your class 2 medical. So make sure you're physically fit and stuff. I got mine done by Gloucester Aviation Medicals at a cost of £191. So I've left a link below to their website if you want to check them out. Second, you're going to need to pass the Airlaw exam. The exam fee was £30. You can see here that I got that done and had my first solo flight 20 days later, so not too bad time-wise. Now at this point, I'd spent nearly £4,000, well, £3,709.80 to be exact, and 23 hours in flying lessons. So the cost of aviation was really starting to show, but what an amazing day. If you wanted to go and see my first solo flight, I've left a link to the recording at the bottom in the description, so check it out. Now, I have to say, I was fortunate. For various reasons, I had no work commitments at the time and the money was already put to one side. So this meant that if the school had a cancellation with another student, they could call me in an hour before and I'll be there to take that slot. You can see from my analysis that I often did 2 lessons, sometimes 3 lessons in a day around that time. Now let's talk theory. I believe, and it's just my opinion, that the further away you get from your school and university years, the harder it becomes to study. Studying is a skill, and as all pilots know, skill fade happens. If you don't keep up the currency, then it goes. And so this was a bit of a struggle for me. Also, a lot of us, as we get a bit older, we've got kids, demanding jobs, out of work commitments, and this all contributes to how effective your study skills are. So my solution was to book a 1-week intensive ground school course, just to get them all done. I spent £2,000. This was the course itself, the exam fees and the accommodation. Now it sounds like a lot, and actually I didn't realise at the time it was actually more costly than that. And you can see that from my analysis. I stopped flying lessons altogether just to self-study, and then there was a lot of bad weather with the few lessons I had planned, so they got cancelled. And remember I just talked about skill fade in studying? Well, the same applies for flying, and more so because the skills aren't already second nature yet. So when I did return to flying after passing my exams, I probably spent 6 lessons and a month just relearning what I knew before I'd stopped. So I would say that I spent about £900 in lessons just catching up. So that's £3,165.22 on theory. And here's my second tip. If money isn't a big thing, then get on and do what I did. It's not a should at all. You do have to work hard. You have to put in the effort, but it's short, it's sharp, and it's easy to manage your life around. But don't stop flying. And if money is something you need to be tracking, and I wish I did this better if I'm honest, you could save over 3k just by planning and studying along your lessons. In fact, the real tip here is consistency. And on that, another top tip, you've got to be consistent. With your lessons, with your theory, with your flying, when you miss a lesson, it's going to cost you at a rate of £180 an hour minimum. So make sure you study the flying theory bits before you go to your practical lesson. Again, it's just about being smarter with your studying inside and outside of the cockpit. Hands up? I didn't. And that brings me on to the main event of the spend and time, the flying lessons. I spent almost £13,000 on over 78 hours of flying. That works out, on average, £162 per hour, which by UK averages is actually pretty cheap. And by the way, if you do like the sound of those hourly prices, make sure you hit up Herefordshire Aero Club. It's a bit of a mouthful. Links below. Anyway, that could have been more if I flew in some of the nicer planes. And that brings me to my fourth top tip, actually. If you get to choose a plane, go with the cheaper hourly cost all the time. When you get your license, you can always do some familiarization or differences training for the nicer planes. This is probably one of the only things I did right. So now we've got one more milestone to achieve, and that's the qualifying cross country. And this was my most expensive lesson, nearly 500 quid. And because of the 2 aerodrome stops, there were 2 lots of landing fees as well. So that brought it up a little bit higher. There was also a bacon buddy and a coffee at Leicestershire Airport, but I've not included that. What an experience. Another epic milestone that pushes all of that money to the back of your mind. There's a little joke you're going to see on Facebook groups and stuff. Pilots talk about these bacon buddies being the most expensive breakfast you can buy because of the cost of the flight. Now, I must admit, I can see why, but hey, pilots are sensible, rational people, aren't we? Otherwise, we wouldn't do it, right? So that's another video. So on to the flying lessons. So there's 19 skills that you're going to need to learn. The first 3 are super basic and will be part of every single lesson you do. Things like aircraft checks, post-flight briefings, familiarization with the cockpit equipment. Then there's the remaining 16 skills, which are all about in the air. And they have sub-skills as well. Perhaps breaking these down is another video. Now, I tracked all of those skills and what ones I worked on with each lesson, and most lessons did cover multiple skills, so I'll share some stats for you. 55% of my lessons contain circuits. You'll love and hate them, but they really help fine-tune things, routines, ready for landings, that kind of thing. 32% of my lessons contain cross-country navigation. You'd think after so many circuits, you'd be good to go with cross-country, but when you add in that radio comms, it really does add another layer of complexity that you've got to get used to. Some other interesting facts. In my training, I landed 222 times. 11 of my lessons were about practicing emergency landings. To be honest, I've probably done about 30 or 40 of these, and 17% of the lessons focus on just flying straight and level. So I've got 2 tips here. First, trust in the process. Don't jump ahead. The PPL is a proven process that turns out thousands of pilots a year. I don't know what the success rate is, but I'd imagine it's very high if my training experience was a benchmark. So next tip is understand the politics of booking lessons. Yep, politics. We've got a national shortage of flight instructors, so you're competing for plane hire and instructors with other students, which means you'll need to be booking at least 2 to 4 weeks in advance. The weather isn't as reliable as your booking, so a higher than you think percentage will be cancelled. Now, booking more lessons than you need or budgeted for is important. In fact, this is a top tip. I'm not sure the flight schools were like this, but we all did it. So you should assume a third of your lesson bookings are going to get cancelled. They get cancelled due to poor weather, planes being taken out of service for servicing. You know, sometimes you get asked if you'd give up your slot to accommodate another student's milestone flight, because the weather's optimal. All completely reasonable things. So by booking a few extra flights, you give yourself some backups. Don't worry about cancelling what you don't need. As long as you give a few days notice, the spot's always going to get refilled. As I said, you're always competing for plane hire time with other students. So compete. So we're nearly there now. The final leg about the practical exams. You'll need to pay for the radio practical exam, which for me was a 2-hour coaching session and the exam fee itself, totaling £180. Now, I have to do a shout out to Kevin, my FRT for toll, well, however you say it, trainer and examiner. I really can't recommend him enough. So please contact Javelin Aero when your time comes. His email's in the description below. Now, I'm not here to bash anyone, so I won't, but shop around if you want to self-manage this outside of your flying school, because I found that they weren't great cost-wise. They didn't really connect with me. Anyway, finally, the skills exam. This was £510. Now, I'm not here to talk about the exam in any detail, but let's just say I flew in probably the worst weather I'd ever flown in. And in hindsight, I had the best time ever. In fact, I thought I'd failed within the first 10 minutes of being up in the air. And that had a really good psychological effect on me, because thinking I'd failed, I stopped trying to pass the test. The pressure was gone. I just did what I was told, flew the plane, enjoyed myself. No stress. And when we were done and we was walking back to for the debrief, the examiner shook my hand and said, "Congrats, boy, welcome to the club." Well, actually, it was from Gloucester, so he didn't sound nothing like that. But honestly, I felt like crying and couldn't believe it. What a feeling. And I bet every pilot has a story to tell on that feeling. But actually, we're not actually done yet. Next, you can't fly solo until you've got that bit of paper in your hand from the CAA. So you can fly on your instructor's license, but it's not the same. It took me a month to get my license. Now, all I can say is make sure you fill in the forms properly and get all of your paperwork right. I was told this very tip and I thought I did it, but I didn't. The CAA will get your license to you within about 10 days after receiving a fully compliant pack. It took me over 2 weeks to get a fully compliant pack, so I've only got myself to blame, to be honest. Here's top tip number 7. You do have to pay for your plane, your PPL license, and your radio license separately. If you send off them at the same time, you only pay for your PPL. You don't have to pay for the radio. So do it together. It'll save you time and you'll save money. So overall, I took 20 months from my first lesson to passing my radio exam. I could have shaved 4 months off of that total time and saved about £3,000 in optional costs, as well as £1,000 in the extra lessons I did just to catch up if I followed the tips in this video. That's £4,000 and nearly half a year. Well, you may have differences in your lifestyle, but in this video I focused on areas that are probably most common. If we ever met for that $1 million bacon butty, I'll share some more stuff, which is quite interesting. But that's it. That's my PPL. I've given you my facts, some opinions on where I could have improved and either finished sooner or finished with more change in the pocket. And having actually been flying as much as possible since getting my license, as you can imagine, there's a bunch of resources that I actually found really useful afterwards that I wish I'd known of at the beginning. So please check my links below. So I hope you've got something out of this video, and I know every pilot says it, and having been one recently, every student listens to it but doesn't really hear it. But seriously, honestly, enjoy your journey. No one person has the same experience because we're all different in our learning styles. We've all got different commitments at home. We also have different tolerances to the costs. So don't worry. In hindsight, there's loads I wish I'd done differently, honestly. And it's easy to say, but don't worry. Just enjoy your journey. Take on some of my tips to either reduce the costs or reduce the time it takes to actually get your PPL. Do it, be consistent, and work to your constraints. Good luck, and if you're ever visiting Shobden Aerodrome, make sure you let me know and we can grab a coffee at Meg's Cafe.